All right, welcome. So in today's session, I have invited Michelle Simpson and Cheryl to do a masterclass around mathematics. So thinking mathematically and building connections that empower students and teachers through concept-based inquiry. Both Michelle and Cheryl have been working on the maths project, and that's how I first met them, the concept-based inquiry mathematics project. And I have been watching them grow their schools. And so I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to share a really practical masterclass. So I've invited them both to share some of the work that they have been doing. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Michelle and Cheryl, and let you take it from here.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, and hi, everybody.
Yep.
Hi and welcome. Welcome, everyone. We really appreciate that you're choosing to spend this time with us and allowing us to share something that we're both really passionate about. So while we introduce ourselves, we invite you to just pop into the chat why you're here, why you're joining us, and what would you like to take away. So I'm Cheryl. I'm originally from New Zealand, and I'm a first-time empty nester. So I'm really struggling with sending my daughter off into the big wide world. But I'm really proud that she seems to be flying off without a backward glance. I do still have my two very precious and very spoiled rescue cats from Oman now living with me in Oman. And when I'm not working, I love having adventures. I've managed to share a lot of those with Michelle as our paths have kept crossing over the years, and she really continues to inspire my learning journey. So after working in elementary education around the world for 25 years, I still find teaching and leading learning to be really exciting and provocative. I've recently completed a master's degree in teaching and learning, and I'm currently teaching in Ethiopia and working toward the Ericsson and Learning CBCI trainer certification. I'm a passionate advocate for concept-based inquiry. And last year I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to work in a pilot school for the CBI Maths project. Now that really marked a watershed in my approach to mathematics. So that's me. Michelle, tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, everyone. I'm also from New Zealand, and that's actually where Cheryl and I met. But I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was. Let's just say we know each other well. As Cheryl said, we've had lots of adventures together and lots of fun, both inside and outside of school. And it's always great to work together, and this masterclass is, of course, no exception. I'm a proud mum of two, both who have this year finished university, apparently, but I think there might be more study coming. I'm currently a director of teaching and learning at a school in Oman, and Ericsson and Learning CBCI trainer and workshop leader. I'm also one of the writers of the CBI Mathematics project, and I continue to work on updates and helping teachers implement the project in schools. So, before we get started, please do ask questions as we go. We'll try to keep an eye on the chat and also leave time to follow up at the end. And also do be reminded about respecting copyright. Feel free to take notes, and a recording will be posted where you can zip back to anything you want to review. And of course, you're welcome to share that recording with any of your colleagues or friends who don't make the masterclass this evening.
And I'm just noticing, Michelle, there's lots of great comments coming into the chat. It make me feel like we have planned this in the right way. So thank you for that. Yeah, I agree with someone who's lived in Ethiopia. The coffee's really good. So we have asked you about why you're here. And starting with the why of Simon Sinek fame has been a real launch pad for much of the collaboration that I've shared with Michelle. So why are we motivated to share our journeys into a CBCI approach? Michelle, what got you hooked?
Yeah, for me, it was about there being a missing piece to a puzzle. So I've worked in IB, PYP and MYP schools for many years, and I always felt like something was missing and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And it wasn't until I started working on writing the units for the CBI Mathematics project and doing the concept-based inquiry and action course that I found the missing piece to my jigsaw. And then everything fell into place and started to make sense. And I realized that the missing piece was the solid understanding around the meaning of the term concepts and how concepts drive understanding. And so it was that shift from simply a focus on skills and knowledge, or a two-dimensional curriculum, to a three-dimensional curriculum that focuses on the transfer of essential conceptual understandings. It's changed my whole approach to planning, teaching, learning in all subject areas, not just mathematics. And I get really excited when I start talking about it, as you can probably tell. I think we realise now that many countries are making the shift to concepts and conceptual understandings within their curriculum design, but no one, up until I met Rachel, thank you, Rachel, had really been able to show me how this worked in a way that made sense. Of course, Rachel's work has built on that of Lynn Erickson and Lois Lanning's work around concept-based curriculum and instruction, so I'm very grateful. Cheryl, how about you?
Well, my journey with CBI, and particularly the maths project, is, I suppose, characterised by a shift in growth mindset, both my own and my students. The project really changed how I feel about maths and also how I think about teaching, and it's definitely impacted it changed how I've impacted learning. So I've found that the pathway for teachers offers a lot more support than a traditional scope and sequence. And it's allowed me to become a lot more focused on what learning is happening rather than what the children are doing. So through this approach, learners start to feel really positive about meeting challenges. And I think it's by developing understandings that they build a belief in themselves as mathematicians. And so they feel a lot more confident explaining their thinking and their processes. And it's just really empowering for learners when they've got both the language and the reasoning to talk about their learning. And it's really exciting for teachers. If any of what Michelle and I have said, please do pop it in the chat, because we love to share your experiences too.
Okay, so some guiding questions that will help us tonight. Well, actually, it's nighttime where I am. I'm not sure what time it is where everyone else is. At the end of our time together, we're going to invite you to reflect on these three guiding questions. So as you make connections throughout this presentation, think about how we can empower maths teaching and learning through a concept-based inquiry approach. We also encourage you to consider how intentionality in our approach supports the ultimate goal of moving student thinking towards understanding at a conceptual level, rather than just focusing on skills and knowledge. So, how do we intend to make this time with us worthwhile? So we do intend to provide you with practical strategies that you can take away and inject into your classroom tomorrow. We will show you a questioning pathway that helps guide students so they can build a bridge between learning engagements and construction of their own conceptual understandings. And we're going to take you inside real classrooms so you can see what case studies look like in mathematics.
So, sticking with the why, I'd like you to just take a moment to consider your goal as a teacher of maths. What do you want your students to know and to do, to understand? And as Michelle mentioned, the understand is now a really big component of a lot of curriculum internationally. But for me, that missing part was always, well, how do I get there? So a lot of us have probably experienced option A. We've been able to explicitly deliver curriculum content, transmit knowledge, the facts, and provides lots of opportunity to practice the skills and drills. But my question has been, well, what does success look like in this model? And how does it evidence understanding to me as a teacher? So what we're proposing and would like to share with you today is an alternative pathway that facilitates deep transferable understanding without skipping on the skills and knowledge. It builds from that more specific cognitive level, the skills, up to the understanding of transferable ideas. And it's this interrelationship of knowledge with skills and processes that supports learners to understand why mathematicians do what they do. Actually, one of my students put it a lot more eloquently than me, and she wrote, well, mathematicians can show a number in a lot of ways if you use your brain, and if you use your brain in the maths ways. So I thought this was a perfect encapsulation of what CBI does, because through this process of guiding questions and case studies, we help learners to notice patterns, to make connections, to construct and test their understandings. We're actually helping them to use their brain in the maths ways.
So let's take a look at transitioning from traditional methods to a concept-based inquiry approach. I remember a while ago now when I was teaching maths and literacy for that matter, we went through this stage of using waltz. I don't know if anyone else has ever used waltz, but it was we are learning to. And we put what the students were learning to, we had them on the wall, on the board, in the back of the students' books. And so we might write, we are learning to solve multiplication problems using repeated addition, or we are learning to order numbers to 50. And then we moved into, we are learning how to do things. Oh, I see someone else has got a wolf in the chat as well.
Yes.
So we are learning how to use base 10 blocks or place value charts to represent numbers visually. And so what was the purpose of this? Well, it added some structure and clarity to the lessons for students and for me as the teacher. And it was valuable because it could help design assessments and ensure that my learning goals were being met. But did I give it all away by doing this? Are there other ways to reach our intended learning goals? And I guess another thing, we were told to do this. So I was like, oh, must be the right way. So everyone's going, this is the way. So off you go. What traditional methods have you used in mathematics? Could you pop those in the chat? We just want to have a look and see what other methods people have used in the past traditionally.
I can see I can statements. Yeah, lots of
yes.
statements.
That's right. Remember those. We had a big checklist, didn't we, for students?
Yeah.
Well, what if we switched our WALT into asking questions? What happens then?
All right. So we're asking you to just pause here and consider ways that you might modify what you're currently doing. If you're interested in moving to a more conceptually based inquiry approach, we're not asking you to give away all of the great practice that you're doing. There are really simple ways to start. And our first takeaway is one little small step. And it is this idea of flipping the learning intention to ask a question. Now, we've thought about this like an analogy. If you are given a present and you're unwrapping that present, but you've already been told what's inside, as opposed to being given a gift and experiencing that feeling of exploring its shape, giving it a shape, giving it a bit of a squish and a shake, and then unwrapping it to make your own discovery. Now, can you link this idea to what it might be like for student motivation and intellectual engagement? If you start a lesson telling them what's going to happen, what if we actively call on the student thinking instead? By flipping that learning intention into a question, I believe the purpose has still been met, but just consider what else has happened to student intellectual engagement and motivation. All right, Michelle, let's get into some action.
Here we go. So we're going to take a look at our first strategy, the four-corner debate. So it's one of my favorites, and it's an easy strategy to use in all subject areas, not just in mathematics. So we're going to put ourselves into the student's role and try it out, and then we're going to come back and ask you to think about how you could bring it into your classroom. So in the center of the page, you can see a statement. A fraction is two numbers. Now, I want you to take a stance in one of the four corners in our virtual space. Do you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree? So if you strongly agree, put SA into the chat. If you agree, put A. If you strongly disagree, put SD. And if you disagree, put D. However, there's a catch. You have to justify why you're taking that stance. So what do you think? A fraction is two numbers. Have a go.
Be brave, be risk
Go
takers.
on, be risk takers. There's no right or wrong answer. This is a beautiful thing about a four-corner debate, right?
Oh, there's somebody's
great.
hedging their
Agree.
bets, all of the
Yeah.
answers.
Oh, we've
You have
got
to take one stance.
We've got a real range.
Mm.
But okay, there's a number on the top. SD, it represents a part of one number. Agree, a fraction shows
The relationship.
Okay. So in our real classroom, we'd expand on this opportunity of sharing ideas. Students have gathered in their respective corners and we give them time to discuss why they're standing there, and then they share their thinking back to the whole class. It certainly can lead to some heated debates, I can tell you. But students are also allowed to shift their thinking after hearing other groups' arguments. Now, can you see how this is a teacher? Right now, especially now we've looked in the chat, but in a classroom, it gives us a really quick snapshot or pre-assessment so we can see where our learners are at and what they're thinking. And also, can you see how it engaged your thinking? It gave you a little hook, right? We gave you something to think about. And the statement required you to take a stance and justify it with reasoning. Now, in a classroom, we might even take this opportunity to pose an initial guiding question. But what we don't do as teachers is offer our own opinions. Why do you think in a situation like this, in a four-corner debate, we would not offer our own opinion? What do you think? It stops thinking. Yeah. And that's exactly right. We're recognizing that it's important for students to share their own thinking, justify their own answers. Yes, students would be inclined to copy, agree, guides the process. Kids think you're telling them. Yeah. All of those things we do. We want the students to do the thinking. Exactly. And exactly like some people have said, we don't offer our point of view because then our students think they've got something wrong. And of course, what happens next time when we want them to share an idea? Well, they don't, because like, last time I got it wrong and I don't know what she wants, so I'm not going to say anything. So it's really important that we don't share our thinking in four-corner debates. Another thing you can do, though, at the beginning is take photos of your initial four-corner debate and where students are. And then you can revisit these statements at the end of the unit and see if thinking has changed. So now think about what is your current maths topic. Can you think of a provocative question or a statement that taps into the big idea? Could you start off with that? I say tomorrow because here in the Middle East, I've got school tomorrow, but for a lot of you, it won't be till Monday. But what is your current maths topic? And is there a way you could use this strategy, the four-corner debate, using a statement or a provocative question? Where is this week? Oh, there's so many things coming in the chat. I can't keep up.
Yeah, I just noticed an interesting comment. Hi, Noreen. Interesting comment from Simon, I think it was, who said that he uses a similar strategy across the curriculum. I think actually everything that we show you today is linked to the whole CBI approach. So it's not just, you can take these strategies and you can use them across the curriculum to promote.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think there's just one thing to be aware of here. If your class isn't used to moving around like this, what protocols might you need to establish before engaging in a four-corner debate? And bear this in mind as we work through some other strategies that we have tonight. So now we've engaged you in the learning for this masterclass, we're going to move on to the use of guiding questions. So guiding questions facilitate our ultimate goal of moving student thinking towards understanding their learning at a conceptual level. You can see this question on the screen. How can we effectively leverage the power of guiding questions to support an inductive approach to teaching mathematics? Well, crafting these questions and their plan progressions are really a core element of CBI unit planning, not just for mathematics, but I think as Simon said, for all subjects. These are particular types of questions and ways to structure their use. Teachers develop these skills over time and through collaboration. But for today, we're going to take you inside our classrooms and show you what working with guiding questions to explicitly scaffold understanding can look like.
All right, so come on into my grade 1 classroom where we are working on phase 2 of number operations. And just invite you to take a moment and consider how you would approach this. If you've got a piece of scrap paper or something, stop and jot, write down what do the kids need to know. You might want to write learning intention. What might the lesson look like? What might the children know how to do at the end of it? And how might they demonstrate their understanding? I think it's also really important at this point to just mention that within a CBI framework, when we talk about a lesson, we're talking about a series of learning engagements, not 40 minutes when you're in your class. So just bear that in mind. When I'm talking about a lesson, it might span 3 or 4 sessions. It might span an entire week. Okay. So this is what it looked like in my room. We started with a story on the board, and you can choose whether you just have an image or whether you have the words in the image at the start. And we're asking learners, what's happening in this story problem? As we go through these guiding questions, I'd like you to really think about how the lesson flows and maybe even noticing at the start the intentionality in this initial question, what's happening in the story problem, to set a context for inquiry that really hooks those grade 1 learners into that familiar world of telling stories. So we've got the image up there and they're looking and someone's saying, well, I think they're going to get spiders. And someone else is noticing, well, no, he's given 3 more, so it's going to be bigger. Well, they're going to put them all together, so it might be a large collection. So we're starting to hear this connection with the maths. And so then I might ask, well, let's have a look at the words in the story. What's the question that you need to answer here? All right. So if we can just change the slide, Michelle, that would be great. Thank you. So as we go through these guiding questions, notice how they're really carefully designed to scaffold the introduction of mathematical language, both the words and the symbols, and how the questions invite the children to engage with new vocabulary in this meaningful story context. Now, as we'll highlight as we start to explore case studies a bit later on, the children meet these questions with repeated opportunities to interact with the ideas, use the mathematical vocabulary, and make connections. So we've met the story and then we're asking you, so we've asked them, what's the story asking you to find out? Well, then it's a math story. So what words let you know what's happening to the numbers? And how are mathematicians able to represent that story? Okay, we can change now, Michelle. As we shared lots and lots of story problems and we learned this maths language, we were able to highlight the words that mathematicians used to explain what was happening. So then I started by introducing a storyboard as a way to show what was happening in the story problem. Now, these grade 1 learners are already really familiar with the idea that a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it's not a big step to look for how does the problem start, how does it change, and what the result is. And you'll see Michelle address this concept again when she's showing you examples of working with phase 6 learners. So as the children explore lots and lots of different story problems and use the language, we want them to also be able to have a visual way of documenting their investigations. And a cross-comparison chart is a really powerful organizing strategy that supports learners to see the connections that they're making as they go through this process with lots of different stories in their investigation. We'll meet this again in the case studies, that these guiding questions don't just come once, they're repeated, and the children keep getting opportunities to use them and to interact with the ideas and the vocabulary as they build connections. So just a couple of things to notice. One, teachers know that questions are powerful. However, we really unlock their potential when they're carefully crafted to scaffold the understanding, and when they're used in conjunction with strategies that engage students in interacting with them as a learning tool. So I hope you noticed some really easy to adopt takeaways. There's my modelling book, the working wall. These are not beautiful display pieces. These are living parts of the classroom where we have the language that we're using and the experiences that the children are engaged in up permanently, or evolving change, but permanently there for the children to refer to jog their memories back to, oh, this is what we did. Oh, yes, these were the words that we used. And that keeps it really alive for them. We saw examples of using really simple sorting strategies, for example, creating a format of a T-chart on the carpet, getting them to sort out their stories, which belongs with the joining together, which belongs with the taking away. Another really important thing is being able to let children select the different kinds of materials that they might choose to use. Some of them will want to write with words. Some of them will want to draw pictures or use numbers. Some of them are going to prefer to use manipulatives. These are all really great ways to model and share their thinking and make their connections visible. So this is the learning engagement, the flow of the learning engagement. And I'd just like you to take a moment, peruse these, and just ponder how these questions guided the flow of the lesson. Can you see the transition from things that are more concrete, looking specifically at this story problem, and transitioning right through to something that requires a more abstract, conceptual level of thinking?
Okay, so now we're going to have a look at phase 6 number operations and some guiding questions and learning engagements that we find here for older students. So again, as we go through the guiding questions, think about how this lesson flows. Now, as Cheryl mentioned, I actually taught this lesson over 4 days, so it's not a 40-minute period. So students have been working with operations in mathematics for a very long time by the time they get to phase 6. And so our first question here was, what is an operation? So we want to find out what students understand about number operations. And in this case, we ask them to sort the 12 cards that you can see on the screen into examples and non-examples of operations using what we call an is and is not chart. Now you can see lots of different types of examples on the screen. As you'll notice, we've given students some traditional and non-traditional ways of representing number operations. There's a mixture of equations, word problems, models, and of course, some clear non-examples of number operations. So what did these students do with that when we sorted? So here you can see they're in pairs and they're working together to complete an is not chart. So the students cut up their examples and they had to place them in either is a number operation, is not a number operation. Now, while students were doing this, I'm listening carefully into their conversations and asking clarifying questions about why they're placing examples where they were. They weren't allowed to glue them on until we finished having our conversations. And once they'd completed their charts, each pair shared with the other groups to compare and explain their thinking. Now, as a teacher, this allows us to really see if there are any misconceptions in students' thinking, so any misunderstandings that have come through perhaps from previous phases or previous years. But it also makes students consider which of the examples provided have attributes or do not have attributes of a number operation. Then as we followed through the lesson, we shifted the focus to the next guiding question, which was how do operations work? And this is another strategy that you can use to help build their understanding about operations. Now, in this case, you can see we're using what's called a spectrum statement. So we've got strongly disagree and strongly agree on either end of our line. Now, this is different to the four-corner debate because students can choose to stand anywhere they like along the line, but the four-corner debate really clearly requires students to take a stance. There's no in-between options in a four-corner debate. Now, let's think about this question. Multiplying two numbers together gives you a number that is larger. Where would you place yourself on the spectrum statement? At either end or somewhere in the middle? So can you explain in the chat where you would stand and why? Do you strongly agree multiplying two numbers together gives you a number that is larger? Or are you more down the strongly disagree end? It depends. Oh, on what, Catherine? Disagree. Integers are positive and negative. Middle.
Yeah.
Strongly agree. It's two parts together.
Yeah. And of course, if you're working in different phases, the way that you respond to the spectrum is going to be different as well. You know, you're pitching to what the children's experiences have been.
And again,
Yeah.
okay. There's some very strong mathematicians in this group, I can see.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
Middle's a nice, safe place to be.
Yeah. But again, when we're asking students to do this, we want to be having a discussion around why did you stand there? And so you can see in each of these photos, in this lesson, we had 6 statements where students had to place themselves on the spectrum statement. And then they were asked to justify why they were standing where they were. And again, as a teacher, it acts as great formative assessment around what students understand about how operations work. And it can inform you of any misconceptions that they might already have. Oh, the chat's going crazy.
Yeah,
the spectrum statement.
So I think one of the other really nice things with the spectrum is that you can flip end to end and get some really interesting discussion going if you turn and talk to the person beside you while you're here, and then so you've got that security of sharing similar ideas, but then you kind of just put some more challenge in as well.
It does require students to really start thinking about, how do operations work? All right, then what came next? Well, remember Cheryl talked to you about the cross-comparison chart in phase 2, which allows students to make connections between concepts and the case studies that have been explored. So we use this again in phase 6, and actually we use it quite a lot in CBI. It's a great way to use graphic organisers like this because they help reduce cognitive load. They allow students to record information related to the driving concepts of the unit, and they can look for patterns and make connections across all the case studies. We're not just expecting them to remember it from one lesson to the next. They're actually documenting clearly in the cross-comparison chart, and they can refer back to that later if they need to. So in this one, the guiding questions then moved on to which operation would you use to solve this problem? And what were the key words that helped you solve the problem? So the students were, again, working in pairs and choosing from case studies that we've provided for them. So in this case, the case studies were word problems, or in phase 2, we called them story problems because that's more age and stage appropriate. But each pair of students chose the case studies they wanted to explore, and then they answered the guiding questions on the cross-comparison chart. And here you can see an example of a completed chart. And this really gives you a lot of insight into how students are thinking. And using many case studies and organising them in this way requires students to do the heavy lifting. You can see here, I'm not doing any of the heavy lifting. It's all the students. They have to do the thinking. They need to identify patterns to understand what's happening in the maths problems given to them, rather than simply solving an equation using a procedure that we've taught them. It's more than just practice for practice sake. It's really digging into how operations work and what clues word problems provide that allow students to solve the problem. Of course, you can see there's still opportunities for students to write equations that fit the problem and solve the equation. So, something to think about. How does this compare to doing lots of practice like we might find in a textbook? Now, there is a question just propped up about exemplars, but I missed it, Cheryl.
It was Simon asking, do we give an exemplar? Your answers would be organised. And I think this is where, like for me, working with the younger students, we would probably model first before going away. What would you do with the older ones, Michelle?
Yeah, by the time they get to sort of phase 4, 5, 6, we don't need to model a cross-comparison chart. They're used to using it because we will often use this in literacy as well. So looking at case studies across books or texts or poems, or if I'm in social studies and I'm doing a unit on migration, I'll be looking at my guiding questions and looking for comparisons across the case studies I'm using there. So in the older age groups, no, I don't. I do ask them to go through the questions at the top and make sure they can read and understand them. But at this stage, I don't need to model them so much.
Especially if they've been working in this framework from the early years, they will get really, really familiar with Freya models, with cross-comparison charts. And as a teacher, that means that you're building this toolbox. You're not starting from scratch every time you go to a new unit, because you have a way of scaffolding toward understanding.
Great. You're welcome, Sonia. Okay, so the final question in this lesson was, how do people decide which operation will help solve a problem? Now, the answer to this question provides our assessment, okay? It's what we want our students to understand conceptually. So we ask students to articulate their understanding in the form of a generalization so we can get a really clear picture of what they do and don't understand. So if you take a look at what the intended understanding or generalization was, and then you take a look at what the students have written, what do you notice? Are they close? What does it tell you about what each student understands about using number operations to solve a problem? Now, just a note here, we don't share the understandings with our students, all right? We let them give, it's hard to read. I'm sorry about that. I'm in a different screen, but I can tell you that on the whole, most of them didn't quite say word for word, but they had all of the concepts in their understanding that matched the driving understanding that I was aiming for, the generalization. Now, again, I don't share that with them up front. In fact, I never share that with them because, again, if I share that after they've given me their generalization or their understanding, goes back to what we were saying about the four-corner debate. They're like, oh, I got it wrong. And then they don't want to share their understanding moving forward.
I think too, just to pick up, Michelle, on you saying, we're not looking for necessarily a verbatim or a parroting of that. And this is where your overall teacher judgment is really important. If you know your material and they use, for example, the word stuff instead of properties, if it was just an example that comes into my mind because I was doing some science before, if they talk about that, then I'm going to know that they actually get the understanding. So it's not about repeating back the exact words, and it's the same as we'll talk later. It doesn't have to be written. It's about showing that understanding and you using your judgment to determine how the children are expressing that understanding.
Okay, so I guess it's just, again, that difference between the traditional two-dimensional curriculum where students in maths have traditionally focused on knowledge and skills and procedures, right? But concept-based inquiry maths takes that 3D approach to curriculum learning, focusing on knowledge, skills, and understandings. And so we're using these guiding questions really intentionally to scaffold student understanding rather than providing just lots of problems to be solved. using a procedure, and then assuming that students have demonstrated understanding just because they got everything right. Because what we do now is just because they get all of the 200 questions that I ask them right to do procedurally doesn't mean they understand what's going on. And in order to transfer that understanding into real world context, we need to make sure they do get that.
And I'm just seeing Mariska has also made this a really important point of, translanguaging and making sure, it doesn't have to be written in English, and that some of the key conceptual words are written in and displayed around the classroom in the languages that are present in your room. Thanks for that, Mariska.
Yeah, great. Now, so just back to the guiding questions, and we've got the phase 2 and the phase 6 ones side by side. Can you see how the guiding questions, as Cheryl talked about, they drive the flow of the lessons? They begin with something more factual and concrete and provide opportunities for students to unpack case studies, but finish with a conceptual question that requires students to share their understandings. We also take it that one step further, and I talked about transfer. And that's the final phase in our CBI and the inquiry process as well. It allows students to test out their generalizations. So let's have a look. So this is one of the transfer tasks that follows the understanding of phase 6. Transfer tasks can require students to test or prove their generalization by applying it to new situations. And in this case, the situation represented is shown in one of the photo cards. So we're here where our students have written their generalizations. We know what they understand, but can they transfer that now into a new problem? And here you can see these are just images, right? So we're asking them to write a word problem that represents the situation and then use the chart to help check the word problem.
All right. So just before I go on to this, I'd just like to respond to Iram. I'm not sure if I'm saying your name properly in the chat. What if some students have a misconception and we don't reveal the correct choice in the four-cornered debate? So I'll just pull you back to when Michelle demonstrated this, she was using that at the beginning of our learning engagement. So it was a pre-assessment. She would notice that, and then as the lesson progressed, she would be looking particularly at those learners that did have that misconception. Of course, you can use that at different times in the lesson sequence as well, but hopefully you're also seeing by that transfer phase that we're moving also beyond they've written their understanding, but there's another stage to also see that misconceptions have been ironed out. So it's never just this one-off. All right.
And I think there also, what you can do is if students are still demonstrating misconceptions, we can ask more questions, we can provide more case studies, more opportunities to look for those patterns and make those connections so that we address those misconceptions as they arise.
I'm seeing a couple of other really good questions. Yes, you will get a copy of the presentation. Yes, we do struggle with timing because that's what teachers do. But I prefer to go with the quality rather than the quantity.
Yeah. Maybe we can address that at the end. Sure, I know. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock.
The other thing is that is a really good question about managing teaching across the phases, and we will talk to you about a workshop we are running at the end of January that addresses just that.
Yep.
So what I'm going to do now is just a little check-in on your understanding. Knowing what you know now, can you take a look at this question? Why might teachers use guiding questions when teaching mathematics? So write your conceptual understanding, put your answer in the chat, and use the sentence stem, I understand that.
If you're feeling brave.
Why might teachers use guiding questions?
That's heads down so people are thinking.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, coming to their own understanding.
Who's undeductive
Channel students thinking, yeah, this is another way of saying scaffolding.
rather than being given the recipe. Student guided gives them more student agency. Using guiding questions promotes agency. Can just help students. Students do not all solve problems the same way. No, they don't.
They're clues or prompts to arrive at the understanding.
Allow students to do the heavy lifting. Great.
Fantastic.
Okay, Cheryl.
They've been listening really well, Michelle.
They have. Okay.
All right. So as we've explored guiding questions, both Michelle and I have frequently referred to case studies. Now, this certainly wasn't a term that I was used to bringing to my maths planning. So let's head back into Michelle's classroom and unlock the power of case studies.
So this is a quick recap of the case studies that students explored in Phase 6 number operations. So remember at the beginning, they worked in pairs to check their understanding of number operations, and they sorted 12 cards into examples and non-examples. So the strategy they used was the is not chart, but the case studies were the 12 cards. And then when we looked at the strategy of the spectrum sort as a tool, students explored mathematical statements to further understand how operations work. So in this case, the case studies are the mathematical statements. And then finally, when we were doing the cross-comparison chart, students were asked to organise their thinking. And in this case, the case studies were word problems. So let's take a look in Phase 2.
All right. So I'm just looking in the chat to make sure I'm getting everybody's questions down. So do you remember the Phase 2 learners? They were exploring number operations, and story problems formed the case studies that they investigated to engage with some really fundamental concepts of number operations. And they used a whole range of organising strategies to sort, to identify patterns and make connections that help them construct and share their understanding. T-charts, Venn diagrams, the cross-comparison chart, the storyboards were some examples there. This is an example not from the learning engagement I shared, but from where some learners were working with shape and space. And in these images, the case studies that they were working with were the shapes themselves. They were first asked to compare two shapes that they chose and looking at something they had in common, that something was different. And then this was expanded by moving on to a Freya model, coming up with a definition for a shape of their choice. So again, it's about multiple interactions with shapes, with the case studies, allowing them to refine their thinking and their understandings about shapes.
Sorry, I went too quick.
That's all right. So in this example, students are unpacking case studies that involved folding lots of different strips of paper into equal parts so that they could see the number of parts in each whole. So, and then as an organising strategy, again, they're placing this on a cross-comparison chart and asking guiding questions such as how many wholes, how many equal parts, identify or name the equal parts. So it's making this thinking really visual, making the patterns visual. Again, this is a further example of partitioning, where students were unpacking case studies, looking at lots of different equal parts, and you can see that they're using the strategy that Michelle showed with the older students of is or is not, which is part of a Freya model. And these are just a few examples of what case studies can look like in mathematics. Did you notice, however, that the case studies allowed students to explore multiple examples, to give them lots of opportunities to make connections, look for patterns, and consolidate their understanding about the concepts that are being covered? You can see, I think, in this that there's a real shift from traditional textbook practice to actually doing, discussing, consolidating thinking. And what this means for teachers is that we are really focused in on continually listening to what students are saying, watching what they're doing, looking for those misconceptions that we can address through reissuing the questions or going deeper with our questioning. And one important thing to note is that, students may not get this with the examples that we have provided. They might need some more case studies. And if they're still not coming to the understanding, then it's usually that you need to look back and check whether you've provided strong case studies that do lead to that understanding.
Okay.
So, time for another little check-in. How do case studies facilitate the development of critical thinking and conceptual understanding among students? Put your answers in the chat. So you're writing your conceptual understanding, and you can use the sentence stem, I understand that. But this time I'm also going to give you a concept bank, and I'll just throw in these concepts of case studies, connections, and patterns. And these might help you scaffold your thinking. So give it a go. Yeah, supporting students to make connections leading to deeper understandings.
Case studies identify patterns which lead to connections in their learning.
All right.
Oh, wow, look at this one. Guided questions. Oh, going too fast.
Yeah.
I keep up. Great.
Really great thinking there.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of the time, so I will move on because this next part is where we're heading. So the question is, why do we intentionally build to conceptual understandings? The interrelationship of knowledge, skills, and processes really supports learners to understand the how and the why. Why do mathematicians do what they do? The concept-based inquiry pathway builds from this more specific cognitive level of skills up to deep understanding that transfers. And this is the goal of where we're heading in CBI, whether it's maths or literacy or science, because we know that it's when learning's demonstrated that we really see understanding. But that is a whole new masterclass. However, we can't leave without offering just a little provocation for thinking about intentionality to build to conceptual understanding. So I've got some samples here of written assessments, and I'd like you to just consider those 3 essential questions that we use with learning-focused conversations. Where's this learner at? Where are they going next? What are their next steps? How are you going to get them there? So by looking at this data, what can you learn about the students? Pop your thoughts in the chat. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, we're really making them work hard this
I
evening,
know.
Cheryl.
Yeah. Yep, someone's going to take some of these ideas into their new unit on art forms. That's fantastic.
Great. Lots of great understandings there.
So
it's interesting because no one, when you've asked, what does this tell you about a student? No one's put anything. Sure, that's interesting. I wonder if we move on to your next slide.
Well, I wonder what would happen then if we took that assessment to the next step and we asked the children to explain or demonstrate their understanding. I just want to really clarify that there's multiple means by which students can show both their conceptual understanding and their misconceptions. They can be written down, but they can also be drawn. They can be modelled with materials. You can confer with a child and the teacher can scribe. They can use Google Translate. So pause here and consider what these children have shown you. Hopefully you can see those. In contrast with the earlier slide of the test scores, which would you say best informs your knowledge of the learner? Which would you say best informs next steps in teaching? And which empowers learners to show what they know and understand rather than just being right or wrong?
So I guess, would you go with the test scores, or would you go with looking at students' understandings and generalizations?
And just the one that's in the bottom right corner that's written in green, this was an EAL learner who he had this word properties in his mind from when we'd been working with shapes. But when I'd observed him working in the learning engagements, I knew he had a good understanding. So we worked together with manipulatives and co-constructed what's written there. People can make sense of numbers by modelling them with different materials. So he had a really clear understanding, as opposed to the EAL learner in the previous example who left all his number lines blank.
And a couple of people have noticed that in the chat, Cheryl. It really demonstrates what students know. It can be oral or written, tells us about student understandings. Great.
Yep. Fantastic.
So just to wind up now, we've unpacked some of the learning experiences that contrasted inductive and deductive teaching and learning. And so just quickly, what do we mean by an inductive approach? So if we think back to the examples at the beginning of the slide when we were talking about Walt, is this inductive or deductive? It's inductive because it tells the students or gives away the learning that's coming up. What thinking does the statement require? Probably not much. We've told them what we're going to do. We're going to solve multiplication problems using repeated addition. Okay, that's it. But if we flip the Walt to a question, it becomes inductive. How can mathematicians solve multiplication problems using repeated addition? Suddenly, this sparks student thinking and requires them to construct their own conceptual understandings around solving multiplication problems. Also, think about the examples we've shared today using guiding questions and case studies and how we've used those to scaffold thinking and build towards understanding. These form part of an inductive approach to teaching and learning rather than giving it all away at the beginning of a lesson. And this is a really nice, simple example. If we take a look at what French and Marshall say about inductive and deductive approaches to teaching and learning, we can see that the inductive approach starts by exploring factual examples and remember all of the word problems and story problems. Then they look for patterns. In this case, we use the cross-comparison chart. And then finally, the students formed their own generalizations. Can you see how flipping the Walt, we are learning to, into a question, switched the approach from a deductive one to an inductive one? Now, in the examples we showed you, we didn't put the Walt or the understanding, or if you work in PYP, the central idea at first, as this follows a deductive approach. It reduces the need for students to do the heavy lifting in terms of thinking and simply requires them to validate the understanding or generalization or central idea. Now, there are still times when deductive teaching might add value, but we've run out of time for that one this evening. So, as we come to the end of our masterclass, we hope that we've been able to share some of our passion and left you with some takeaways and low-hanging fruit. As a final request, just take a minute to think. Does a shift to CBI approach have to be overnight? All or nothing? What small steps could you take? What are you thinking that you can take away and immediately try in your class? And I did see it's people are definitely putting things in the chat. Oh, I've got so many ideas, all of them. I love their strategies. So we're really glad we've been able to share that with you. We want to thank you for taking your time to join us this evening. I know that teachers are really busy and time is really precious. So we hope you'll go away with some new thoughts and ideas around things to try out. And do let us know if you have any questions. I know there's so many questions, Rachel, we're never going to get to them.
Yeah. There were a couple that I really wanted to quickly address. There was one question about, in the PYP has multiple phases for one age group. This is really central to the CBI maths approach. And in fact, having taught in PYP for a long time and then being in pilot school last year, the whole phase approach was one of the ways that we were able to pass on information to other colleagues really effectively, and where students did feel that they were working at the place that was right for them. Another really important question, I think, was how do we connect this back to parents at home if we don't have work samples to show? But just think of the power of a child putting their understanding on seesaw or toddle and reading that understanding. I know for my parents last year, they were blown away by the way that their children could share their understandings.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think an easy way for me to address that in my role is through parent meetings and parent workshops, and I actually get parents to do many of the activities that you've been engaged in tonight, and suddenly they see the power in this shift from the traditional model. So Rachel, over to you. Would you like me to move on to the next slide?
Yes, please. All right. So if you're interested in finding out more about the Concept-Based Inquiry Mathematics project, I'm going to pop a link in the chat for you. The Concept-Based Inquiry Mathematics project was developed over about 5 years. And what began as project with two of us involved, Calvin Sparks and I, beginning to articulate a concept-based mathematics scope and sequence. We then realized that schools and teachers needed more support in designing units. So we brought on a team of more than 20 educators from around the world, many who are still involved in revising the units, and actually mapped out concept-based mathematics units for teachers. So as the mathematics project, we have designed units across all of these phases in mathematics: number and number sense, number operations, partitioning, pattern and function, measurement, shape and space, and statistics and probability for all grade levels. Our number and number sense, number operations, and partitioning are our number strands, so they are taught in phases. We've developed 8 phases, and across those phases, we encourage teachers to assess where their students are at and meet them where they are at. So building on the understandings that they have developed with a range of assessment tools. There's a huge emphasis on pre-assessment and really knowing where your students are at, and we provide all of the pre-assessments as a part of that, and we provide the tracking sheets for you to be assessing students' understanding, knowledge and skills. There's a range of games and other resources available as part of the project, and both Michelle and Cheryl have been using them. Cheryl, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, I did, just because one of the questions quite earlier on was about printable examples of the guiding questions, but those are also part of the project, and they're part of what really helped scaffold my deeper understanding of what learners are learning.
Yeah. Fantastic. So I will pop a link to the chat. Sorry, I think I've just popped the link to that in the chat. And if you can go to the next slide, Michelle. Michelle and Cheryl are also teaming up for a workshop on the 31st of January and 1st of February 2025 in Italy. And that gives you a day and a half with Michelle and Cheryl really diving deep into some of these strategies and supporting you in what does it look like to teach in phases, how do you organize your classroom, how do you work with some groups, some students who are at one level and some students who are at quite a different level, what do the students do when they're not with you, and really making sure that teachers feel well supported to design this. So it's open to teachers who are currently involved in the CBI Maths project and teachers who are interested in finding out more about that. So again, I've popped the link for that in the chat if you're looking to find out more about that. We hope to see some of you there. Hang on, I'll just make sure that does go to everyone. Here we go. There we go.
Yeah.
So thank you to Michelle and Cheryl for sharing some of the things that you've been using in your schools, helping us to understand the role of questions and case studies in mathematics to build to understandings, and sharing. It's always lovely to see the actual student generalizations and the way that they have articulated the ideas and the thinking in your own words. Thank you to all of you who have joined us on this Saturday to really support you in your own professional learning journey. If you have any questions, then feel free to send us an email. It's great to connect. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you all. Nice to see familiar faces.
Thank you for your input and all your great questions and feedback. Thank you so much.